The elevator ride to the 48th floor always felt longer than it should. Not because it was slow. Vortek Holdings paid for the fastest lifts money could buy. It was because the higher you went, the more the building itself reminded you, power lives up here. The interns buzzed like bees down on floors 1025, department heads chewed nails on floors 2636, and the board lounged like vultures somewhere around 40. But the CEO's office, that was the summit, and no one went there casually, not unless they were summoned. Aiden Reed's reflection in the elevator doors was a study in nerves. Dark hair, slightly too long, pushed back with a hand that wouldn't stop shaking, tie crooked, badge dangling from his collar. He had spent the whole week avoiding the man upstairs, changing schedules, taking side stairwells, making excuses, pretending he hadn't seen the messages. "You're not leaving the building without speaking to me. We're not done. Don't embarrass yourself." He'd shut his phone off after that one, but the secretary, brutal, efficient, impossible to appeal to, called him 45 minutes later. "Mr. Vortek requests your presence," she said. It wasn't a request. 48th floor. Now. Aiden's stomach had dropped. He knew what that tone meant. It meant the wolf had stopped pacing and started hunting. The elevator doors opened with a quiet hiss. The hallway was silent. Not carpeted, marble tiles, polished until you could see your own fear reflected back at you. The air tasted expensive, leather, cologne, and the faint bite of chilled steel. The receptionist didn't glance up when he walked by. She only pressed a button on her desk and said, "You may enter." No knock, no warming up, no warning. Just a final walk into the lion's den. Aiden swallowed and stepped through the double glass doors into the CEO's office. The first thing people always noticed was the view. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped the room like a crown of glass, showing the entire city below at dusk, streets like veins, lights like pulse points, the rest of the world reduced to something small and far away. The second thing they noticed, always, was the desk. Not cluttered, not messy, not human. A slab of black stone, obsidian, or some wild import. Wide enough it could have been a monument. People didn't sit at it, they spoke to it, like it was a throne. And behind it, the man himself, Damien Vortek. He didn't look up right away. He sat with his back to the city, phone in one hand, a fountain pen in the other, eyes scanning some file on a sleek tablet, like the world around him was unworthy of attention until he granted it permission. That was the thing about wolves. They didn't bark. They simply waited until their prey walked close enough. Aiden cleared his throat. "Mr. Vortek." Damien raised a hand, not a gesture, not a wave, just a single finger lifted, silent command. "Shut up." Aiden's voice died. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Finally, Damien set the tablet face down. He didn't stand, he didn't greet. He just looked at Aiden like he was reading a confession carved into skin. "Sit." His voice wasn't loud, wasn't angry. It was the tone you hear a second before your knees hit the floor in instinct. Aiden obeyed, perching on the edge of the leather chair opposite the desk. Damien leaned back slowly, steepling his fingers, eyes still on him. Silence stretched until Aiden started sweating under the collar of his shirt. Those eyes, they weren't the kind you could look away from. Not because they were beautiful. They were dark, sharp, dangerous. Eyes that said, "You thought you could hide from me. You were wrong." Aiden finally whispered, "I?" Damien interrupted, voice soft as smoke. "You've been avoiding me." A statement, not a question. Aiden's pulse stumbled. "I haven't." "Lie." Damien said. One word, cut clean. Aiden's mouth opened, closed. Damien stood, slow enough to qualify as a performance. He came around the desk. He didn't rush. He didn't posture. He moved like a man who already owned the outcome. Aiden's heart punched at his ribs. Damien stopped beside him, close enough to feel the warmth off his suit jacket. He didn't look down. He looked past Aiden, like studying prey from a higher vantage. "You think distance protects you," he murmured. Aiden stared at the floor. Damien stepped closer. "Tell me," he said, "what exactly you thought was going to happen. That if you ducked meetings, rearranged your shifts, pretended you were invisible," his voice dipped low, "that I would forget you existed?" Aiden forced breath into his lungs. "I didn't want to. I thought." Damien's hand touched the back of his chair, not his shoulder, not his neck, just the chair. A simple bracket of presence behind him, trapping him between leather and obsidian. "That's the problem," Damien whispered near his ear. You think too much." Aiden's skin prickled. Damien leaned forward slightly, breath brushing his cheek. "When I want something," he said, "I don't lose interest if it runs away." That was the wolf talking. Patient, hungry, amused. Aiden swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to disrespect you." Damien chuckled, low, cutting, like a blade dragged across silk. "If you had disrespected me," he said, "we wouldn't be having this conversation." He moved now, slowly, deliberately, and took hold of the chair's armrest. Aiden's pulse thrashed. He couldn't breathe. Damien tilted his head, eyes finally meeting his. No, he murmured. You did something worse. Aiden forced out a whisper. What? Damien's smile was a predator's. You made me curious. The city glowed behind him like the world itself had been reduced to background light for his mood. Damien leaned in just enough that Aiden felt the heat that came off him through the suit, expensive cologne warming the air. And you, he said, ran from the wrong man. Aiden opened his mouth to defend himself. Damien placed 2 fingers under his chin and lifted. Not gently, not harshly, just decisively. Look at me. Aiden's eyes met his, helplessly. Damien's voice went quiet, dangerous, patient. You're not leaving this office, he said, until you tell me why you're avoiding me. He didn't release his chin. He didn't blink. He didn't step back. And Aiden suddenly understood. This wasn't a question. This was a hunt. And the wolf had finally stopped waiting. Aiden didn't know how long he sat there with Damien's fingers under his chin. Seconds. Minutes. Time blurred inside the heat of that gaze. Damien's hand wasn't tight. He didn't crush or force or bruise. He simply held, the way a lion pins prey with one paw, not because it must, but because it can. Aiden swallowed, pulse racing in his throat. I wasn't, he began. Damien lifted one eyebrow a fraction of an inch, the kind of tiny movement that said, keep lying, I dare you. Aiden's voice splintered. He tried again. You thought I wouldn't notice, Damien murmured, completing the sentence for him. You thought you could fade into the background. You thought I would forget the way you look at me. He said it casually, conversationally, like he was reciting a calendar reminder. Aiden's stomach clenched. He hadn't realized he'd been that obvious. Damien finally dropped his hand, not because he wanted to release him, but because he had already made his point. He moved to the front of the desk again and sat on the corner, not in a chair, never that, just perched like a predator, waiting for the heartbeat of a deer to stutter. He crossed his arms, sleeves tightening against his forearms, and watched Aiden with the kind of attention people pay to a live wire. Let's make this simple, he said. You're going to tell me the truth. Not because I'm your CEO, not because I'm angry. I'm neither. He leaned back slightly, spreading his legs, casual posture hiding sharp intent. You're going to tell me, because there's only one reason someone avoids me. He met Aiden's eyes and didn't blink. It's because they want something they don't know how to ask for. The words hit Aiden like a hand around the throat. His mind scrambled, grasping for denial, excuses, a rope to cling to. Damien stepped in with the blade. You want something, he repeated, slower this time, and you're terrified I'll see it. Aiden's heart hammered so hard he could hear it in the silence. The city outside glowed like falling embers. Damien's reflection hovered over it, a dark outline carved into glass. Aiden stared at the floor. I wasn't. Look at me, Damien said again, but this time he didn't touch him. The command alone lifted Aiden's chin. He hated that it worked. Damien studied him for a long, quiet moment. Not impatient, not irritated, just absorbing. Aiden wished he would speak again, even something cruel, because the silence made every second feel like a confession. Damien finally asked, softly, when did it start? Aiden blinked. What? When did you start avoiding me? Damien tilted his head. Give me the exact moment. Aiden searched his memory. It wasn't hard. The moment had burned itself into him. The board meeting, he said quietly. The quarterly review. You were in the glass conference room. Damien finished without hesitation. You were taking notes. Aiden's breath hitched. Damien remembered. He hadn't just noticed him. He cataloged him. Damien turned his gaze to the skyline. That was the first time you couldn't look away, wasn't it? Aiden flushed hot. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. Still no anger. Only certainty. Aiden's voice thinned. I looked at you because I needed to track what you were saying. Everyone does. You didn't look like the others, Damien cut in. They watch my power. They watch my influence. They watch the way I make a room kneel in 10 sentences. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, eyes never leaving Aiden. But you, his voice dipped to something dangerous. You watch me like I'm a storm you want to step inside. Aiden felt his breath stutter. Damien smiled slowly, not sweet, not cruel, a smile that said, now we're finally talking. You think I don't notice when someone studies me? He asked. You think I built this company by ignoring people who stare at me like that? Aiden swallowed. I didn't mean anything by it. Damien's head tilted slightly. You meant everything by it. He stood again, moving back toward Aiden. Not fast, not dramatic, just walking the way gravity walks downhill. When it finally decides it doesn't care about resistance. Aiden felt like air was disappearing. Damien stopped beside him, close enough that the warmth off his suit skirted Aiden's shoulder. Tell me what you're afraid of, Damien said quietly. Aiden didn't answer. He didn't know how. Damien leaned forward, so his voice brushed the edge of Aiden's ear. Is it me? Aiden's chest tightened. No. Is it the board? The company? Losing your internship? No. Damien's tone softened into silk. You're afraid of what happens if I look back. Aiden said nothing. Silence moved between them like a slow wave. Damien never rushed a kill. He simply let the prey walk itself into exhaustion. He reached out, not to touch Aiden, but to rest his hand flat on the desk beside them. Aiden flinched at the thud of palm on obsidian. "Do you know why I called you up here?" Damien asked. Aiden shook his head weakly. Damien's eyes flicked to him, sharp enough to pin him in place. "It isn't because you made a mistake," he said. "It isn't because of your work, or your team, or your department." His voice dropped to a whisper. Aiden felt more than heard. "It's because I do not tolerate mystery in my own building." Aiden's heart raced. Damien leaned in slightly, heat and threat wrapped into posture. "You walk around like a shadow," he murmured. "You watch me in meetings, then disappear. You speak to everyone but me. You see me, then flee." Aiden couldn't breathe. Damien's expression sharpened, eyes dark and hungry. "That," he said, "is not how prey behaves." He let the word hang there. "Prey, like a collar." Aiden opened his mouth, voice catching. "I'm not. You're not prey," Damien asked, almost kindly. "Then why do you run?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The accusation was surgical. Aiden's pulse crashed against his ribs. Damien's eyes softened, only slightly, but enough that it felt like being pulled closer to a cliff. "Say it," he murmured. "What made you run?" Aiden's lips parted. He didn't know what his answer would be until he heard it spill out of him. "I was afraid of what I'd want if I didn't." Damien froze, not in disbelief, in satisfaction. He let the sentence settle between them, like the closing of a cage. Then, very slowly, he smiled. And Aiden realized something horrifying. He hadn't just stepped into the wolf's den. He had just admitted he belonged there. Aiden didn't realize Damien had stopped smiling until the silence became sharp enough to cut. The CEO stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes narrowing. Not in confusion, not in anger, but in the way a predator evaluates the moment before it sinks its teeth in. He wasn't surprised by the confession. He was savoring it. Aiden wished he could yank the words back, bury them, pretend they hadn't come out of his mouth like a prayer he didn't mean to say aloud. But the night skyline behind the CEO reflected the truth. Too late. Damien moved first, not with the dramatic flourish of someone who wants to intimidate, but with the measured grace of a man who has done this before, who has walked across rooms knowing the air bends around him, not the other way around. He circled the desk, not toward the chair, toward Aiden. Aiden's pulse thrashed. His knees wanted to stand. His body wanted to run. Damien stopped in front of him. He didn't touch him. He simply leaned one hand on the desk beside Aiden's thigh, close enough that Aiden could feel the heat radiating from the CEO's skin through the suit sleeve. The move was subtle, but its meaning was impossible to miss. "You're cornered again, afraid of what you'd want," Damien repeated softly, as if tasting the words. Aiden swallowed. "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did." Damien didn't raise his voice. Wolves don't snarl unless they mean to bite. His eyes studied Aiden's throat, how it moved when he swallowed, how it tightened when he tried to breathe. "You thought if you avoided me the wanting would stop," Damien said. "But desire doesn't evaporate, it ferments." He took a slow breath, exhaling warm air into the narrow space between them. "And when it ferments, it gets stronger." Aiden felt heat crawl up his spine. Damien tilted his head, not the way animals tilt in confusion, but the slow, thoughtful way a hunter watches the moment prey finally stops pretending it's not prey. "You think distance would make you forget me," he murmured. "You think silence would make your pulse behave." His gaze locked onto Aiden's eyes. "You think running would keep you safe." He leaned down slightly until Aiden could feel Damien's breath brushing the edge of his cheek. "And yet," Damien whispered, "here you are." Aiden's fingers dug into the armrests, knuckles whitening. Damien noticed. He always noticed. "Look at your hands," he murmured, "gripping the chair like you're preparing for impact." Aiden forced them to unclench. Damien smiled, slow, dark, approving. "Better." He leaned back only enough to give Aiden a full view of him, posture relaxed, eyes calculating. "Tell me something," Damien said. "What is it about me you don't trust yourself with?" Aiden opened his mouth, but nothing formed. Damien's lips curved. "I'll help you," he said. "We'll start small." He raised 2 fingers, counting. "1. Is it the way I talk?" Aiden shook his head too fast. "No. Is it the way I look at you?" Aiden inhaled sharply, and Damien let out a low hum of satisfaction. "So it is my eyes." He leaned in, voice velvet smooth. "You're afraid of what they see, or what they invite." Aiden didn't answer, but Damien didn't need confirmation. The stutter of breath told him everything. He straightened and walked behind him. Not around. Behind. Aiden's skin prickled as Damien's steps echoed past his shoulder. Then silence. No footsteps, no rustle of clothing, just presence. Close, warm, unavoidable. Aiden instinctively looked forward, and that was exactly what Damien wanted. From behind him, Damien's voice slipped like smoke. "You know why I don't sit when I talk to you?" Aiden didn't turn. "Because predators do not negotiate eye to eye." Aiden flinched. Damien continued, circling slowly, appearing again at his left side, closer this time, close enough that the faint scent of expensive cologne and clean heat wrapped around Aiden like a net. "I've had men and women grovel for my attention," Damien said matter-of-factly. "They bring me numbers, reports, flattery, all the desperate, clawing things people do when they want power." He stopped in front of Aiden again, hands in his pockets, posture casual like he was discussing the weather. "But you," he said, "didn't come begging. You hid." Damien's eyes darkened, and hiding is always more interesting than thirst. Aiden's breath trembled. "I wasn't trying to." "You were," Damien cut in, not harshly, but with surgical precision. "You just don't understand why." He stepped closer again, slow, insistent, like gravity. "You avoided me because your body knew something your mind refused to admit." Aiden looked away. Damien leaned down, catching his gaze again, quietly, relentlessly. "You didn't run from me," he murmured. "You ran from yourself." There it was, the trap closing. Aiden's pulse thundered. Damien let him sit in that realization, letting the silence do more damage than any threat could. Then Damien lifted his hand. Aiden braced, but the CEO didn't touch him. He tapped a manicured finger against the edge of the desk. Once, a single command, "Stand up." Aiden froze. "What?" he whispered. Damien didn't blink, didn't repeat, didn't soften. He simply waited. The impatience wasn't in his face. It was in the expectation of inevitability. Aiden rose slowly. His legs felt unsteady, as if the floor was shifting beneath him. Damien stepped aside, subtly guiding him around the desk, not grabbing, not forcing, just placing himself like a current pulling a swimmer around a reef. Aiden stood in front of the CEO's desk now, exactly where Damien wanted him. Damien moved behind him and closed the distance until Aiden could feel the warmth of his chest through the suit fabric. Aiden held still. Damien leaned in. "Do you know why I gave you this chair?" he whispered, "instead of the one across the table?" Aiden shook his head, voice barely audible. "No." Damien's hand lifted, slowly, carefully, and came to rest not on Aiden, but on the desk in front of him, because that was worse. That meant Aiden wasn't restrained by force, only by what he wanted. Damien's voice bled into his ear, "Because prey sits across from me." Aiden's heart stuttered, "And people I'm curious about." Damien's breath warmed his neck, slow and deliberate. "Stand where I can see their fear." Aiden shut his eyes. Damien didn't move away. He spoke into the space between them, tone velvet and blade. "You tasted honesty once tonight," he murmured. "You're going to give me the rest." His hand tapped the desk again, quiet, measured. "And this time," he added, "you won't run from it." Aiden turned, trembling, not from fear, but from the realization that Damien hadn't cornered him. He had coaxed him closer, slowly, patiently, like the wolf he was. Aiden didn't understand the full danger of the position until Damien stepped away. Not because the CEO was backing off. He wasn't. He was measuring distance, like a hunter deciding how much space a trapped animal needs before it stops pretending it can run. Aiden stood there behind the obsidian desk, where executives would never dare to stand. No one stood in the CEO's territory. They sat across from it, trembled beneath it, or signed papers on its surface. Only Damien belonged on the other side. And yet, here Aiden was. Damien moved to the window, hands clasped neatly behind his back, posture impeccable. The skyline washed over him, gold and neon, city veins pulsing far below. He didn't ask another question. He didn't look at Aiden. He simply let the silence suffocate him. Aiden's chest tightened. His lungs begged for air that didn't exist. This wasn't intimidation, not the cheap kind used by bosses or petty tyrants. This was predation, natural, unhurried, ancient, the kind of pressure that makes rabbits still and soldiers sweat. Aiden finally broke. "I wasn't running from you," he whispered. Damien didn't turn. He only said, evenly, "No one ever runs from me." Aiden's throat tightened. "That's not. They run from what they feel around me." Damien continued, voice almost bored. "They run when they realize the power dynamic is no longer external." He pivoted slightly, just enough for Aiden to see the harsh, clean line of his jaw against the city lights. "They run when they understand control has already moved inside them." Aiden swallowed. Damien finally turned. The room changed temperature when he faced forward again. He walked back, not in a straight line, not quickly, but in a subtle arc that forced Aiden to track him, to adjust his stance, to feel watched. He stopped at the desk and placed one hand flat on the obsidian surface. His fingers were long, elegant, calm. "You think I'm the kind of man who chases interns?" he asked quietly. Aiden stammered. I don't, Damien said. "If they want attention, they crawl for it. They grovel, they seduce. I ignore them." His gaze sharpened. "I do not hunt people who want nothing from me." The implication hit like lightning. Aiden wanted something. That was the difference. That was the trigger. That was the reason he was standing behind the desk instead of across it. Damien leaned forward just slightly. "You started avoiding me," he said the moment you realized I noticed you. Aiden's pulse ricocheted. Damien continued, voice low and devastating. "And you ran because you didn't know what I would do with that knowledge." He was right. God, he was right. Damien didn't wait for confirmation. He never needed it. He read reactions like reports. He walked around the side of the desk and sat on its edge again, just beside Aiden's hip. Not enough to touch, enough to eclipse his breath. Aiden's body reacted first, muscles taut, shoulders rising, heartbeat stuttering. Damien observed, silent, fascinated. His tone turned soft. "Tell me what you thought I'd do." Aiden stared at the floor. "I don't." Damien's voice cut, barely above a whisper. "Look at me." He obeyed. "Always." Aiden's eyes traveled up, hesitant, terrified, and met Damien's gaze. The CEO studied him with the patience of someone who already knew the answer. "You feared I'd consume you," Damien said gently, "that you'd lose whatever fragile composure you cling to." Aiden's knees weakened. Damien exhaled a soft breath, not mocking, understanding. "You thought you'd come apart under me." Aiden tried to speak, but his throat shut down. Damien didn't gloat. He leaned in and spoke like a confession. "You were right." Aiden's body went hot and cold at the same time. Damien shifted, sliding off the desk. He didn't step away. He stepped into Aiden's space, slowly, deliberately, until Aiden felt the warmth of his body through the air. Damien lifted his hand. Aiden tensed, but Damien didn't touch him. He reached past Aiden and laid his palm flat on the center of the desk between them. "Claim." "I'm going to teach you something," Damien murmured, "about this office." Aiden stood frozen. "This," he tapped the stone lightly, "is where I work." He moved his hand a few inches closer to Aiden. "This is where I make choices." Closer still. "This is where I destroy people." Aiden's breath shook. Damien's eyes softened, not with mercy, but with hunger. "And now," he said, voice almost tender, "you're standing where I decide who I keep." Aiden blinked. "Keep." Damien stepped even closer, so close the faint heat of his breath grazed Aiden's jaw. "Locking a deal," he murmured, "promoting an asset, elevating a piece of potential." Aiden swallowed. Is that what you're doing?" Damien smiled without showing teeth. "You're not an asset," he said, yet. His voice dipped lower. "You're a variable." Aiden's skin prickled. "A variable, unpredictable," Damien said, "untamed, disrespectful, dangerous to ignore." He moved around Aiden again, not touching, just circling, like a man checking weak points in a fence. "And interesting," he added. Aiden spun slightly to follow him. Damien stopped behind him. His voice was close, closer than before. "You do not avoid someone you find boring." Heat crawled up Aiden's spine. Damien wasn't wrong. Damien leaned forward an inch, enough to feel the space between their necks hum. "You listened to every word I said in that board meeting," he murmured. "You traced how I spoke, how I moved, how I dismantled the CFO's projections like they were made of paper." Aiden trembled. Damien continued, like reciting a list. "You didn't watch the numbers. You didn't watch the presentation. You watched me." Aiden tried to turn, but Damien shifted closer, body heat pinning Aiden between himself and the desk without a single touch. "And when I looked back," Damien whispered, "you broke." Aiden's lips parted. Damien stepped beside him again, giving him enough space to breathe. "Barely. You can deny it," he said. "You can lie. You can pretend you stared at the slides or the budget or the report." His gaze went razor sharp. "But I know hunger when it looks at me." Aiden's knees nearly buckled. Damien reached out, but didn't touch him. His fingers hovered beside Aiden's hip, not brushing, just present, a promise. Aiden's voice finally cracked through the pressure. "What do you want from me?" Damien's eyes flicked downward, then back up slowly. His answer came like a verdict. "I want you to stop running." Aiden exhaled like a dam breaking. Damien moved closer, barely a breath away. "And I want," he murmured, "to see what you become when you finally look back." He leaned in, close enough. Aiden felt every syllable against his skin. "You don't get to hide in my building," he whispered. "Not from me." The city outside flared against the window like distant fire. And for the first time, Aiden understood. Avoiding Damien hadn't delayed anything. It had sharpened the wolf's teeth. Aiden didn't realize his knees were shaking until he heard the soft tap of fabric against the stone, his slacks brushing the edge of Damien's desk as he instinctively backed into it. He had been walking away without meaning to. The wolf had not moved. Damien stood close enough now that the expensive cologne on his skin replaced the smell of the office. Bergamot, cedar, something sharp like ozone before a storm. He watched Aiden with the patience of a man who never blinked first. "You keep stepping back," Damien said quietly. "You don't even know you're doing it." Aiden swallowed. His heel nudged the base of the desk again. "It's not. It is." Damien stepped forward, closing the distance Aiden kept trying to create. "You retreat even when you tell yourself you're standing still." Aiden's breath caught. "And do you know what prey does right before it stops running?" Damien asked, voice low. Aiden shook his head. "They corner themselves." Damien placed both hands on the desk behind Aiden, one on either side of him. The obsidian slab was cold, the CEO was not. Damien didn't grab him, didn't trap him by force. He blocked the exit. Aiden could have stepped sideways, technically, but that wasn't an exit. That was an escape route he wasn't ready to take. Damien leaned in, his shadow falling over Aiden like a second skin. "You asked what I want," he murmured. Aiden forced his voice out. "Yes. Good." Damien's eyes darkened. "Because you're finally ready to hear it." Aiden's pulse hammered so loudly it felt like the only sound in the room. Damien lowered his head slightly, eyes narrowing with surgical precision. "I want to see you stop hiding." Aiden whispered, "I'm not." Damien's voice cut through the lie like a blade through silk. "You hide behind competence." He tilted his chin. "You hide behind tasks." His gaze shifted downward, reading posture like body text. "You hide behind politeness, professionalism." He leaned closer. "And the fantasy that you can pretend you don't feel anything when I look at you." Aiden's spine stiffened. Damien's voice softened, almost intimate. "But you can't lie to your pulse." He pressed one fingertip to the hollow of his own throat. Demonstration, not threat. He didn't touch Aiden. "You feel me here," Damien murmured. "In the blood." He lowered his hand. "Not in the mind." Aiden's knees wavered. Damien stepped closer, eliminating the final inch of air like he'd been waiting for that moment all night. "You didn't avoid me because you disliked me," he said. "You avoided me because part of you understood something terrifying." Aiden's lips parted. "What?" Damien's gaze burned steady, unflinching. "That if I gave you even an inch of attention," he leaned forward just enough that Aiden felt the heat radiating between their ribs, "you would stop pretending you wanted anything less than all of it." Aiden's breath stuttered. Damien let the words sink like weights into water. He had no reason to rush. The wolf never rushes once the throat is bare. Damien slid one hand forward across the desk. Only one. No contact. Just the sight of his palm flattening near Aiden's hip, close but untouching, like a brand being heated. "Do you know how many executives beg to stand where you are?" Damien asked. Aiden shook his head, terrified of the answer. "Half the board," Damien said. 3 department heads." He smiled faintly. "A senator once." Aiden laughed. A nervous, broken exhale. Damien didn't laugh back. "They tried to manufacture what you did by accident," he continued. "They offered themselves openly." His eyes narrowed. "And I walked past them." "You ran." He paused. "You fought it." He leaned in so close Aiden felt the words brush skin. "And nothing," his voice dipped lower, "is more attractive to a predator than something that fights its own instinct." The room felt too small. Aiden swallowed, trying to form a sentence. A defense, a confession, a plea. Nothing came. Damien didn't wait. He stepped even closer, and this time Aiden had nowhere to go. The edge of the desk pressed into his lower back. Damien's hand came up, not to grab, not to push. He lifted Aiden's jaw with 2 fingers. Not harsh, not gentle. A decision. Aiden's breath caught. Damien held him there, eyes locked on his like they were mirrors of the same hunger. "You're not avoiding me anymore," he said softly. "You're shaking in front of me." Aiden tried to look away. Damien's fingers tightened, just enough to hold the angle of his jaw. "Look at me." Aiden did. "Always." Damien exhaled slowly, and Aiden could feel the warmth of it fan across his lips, his cheek, the soft edge of his ear. "When you ran," Damien murmured, "you gave me permission." Aiden blinked. "Permission?" Damien's gaze burned. "To chase." Aiden's spine straightened involuntarily. Damien's thumb traced the line beneath Aiden's jaw, not caressing, not exploring, just measuring how easily the pulse could be accessed. "You are not prey because you are weak," Damien said. "You are prey because you tempt the wolf." Aiden trembled. "And the wolf," Damien whispered, "does not forgive temptation." He released Aiden's chin, only to reposition his hand flat on the desk behind Aiden's hip, closing the trap fully. No more excuses, no more pretending, no more running. Damien's eyes softened into something darker, deeper, hungrier. "You will tell me why you wanted distance," he said, "or I will teach you what closeness feels like." Aiden swallowed hard, panic and desire twisting until they were indistinguishable. Damien leaned in, voice barely audible now, danger disguised as silk. "Choose." Not a threat, a promise. The wolf had stopped circling, he had sunk his teeth into the moment, and the only question left was whether Aiden would bleed honesty or break trying to hold it back. Aiden didn't sleep, not the soft half-sleep of exhaustion, not the shallow kind born of anxiety. He laid awake in his apartment, fully dressed in clothes he didn't remember putting on, staring at the ceiling like it was a blank page waiting for testimony. Every time he blinked, He saw Damien again, not the CEO, not the billionaire, the predator. The man who had leaned over him at that obsidian desk and spoken to him like truth wasn't a choice, but an inevitability. You will tell me why you wanted distance, or I will teach you what closeness feels like. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not loud, not angry, not unhinged. Calm, controlled, dangerous because it was true. And for the first time in Aiden's adult life, he didn't know which terrified him more. That Damien would force closeness, or that he would offer it, and Aiden would accept. The next morning, the office had changed. Not physically. The building still gleamed, still screamed wealth, still hummed with that intimidating efficiency. But Aiden felt the air notice him. People walked past him differently. Not because they knew anything. They couldn't. They didn't. They moved around him because he noticed him. He noticed himself. He replayed every word Damien had spoken in that room. Every pause. Every deliberate step that cut off escape. And despite the terror, something else bloomed beneath it. Anticipation. Not the excited kind. The kind soldiers feel before stepping off the helicopter. The kind athletes feel walking into a ring. The kind of anticipation that tastes like, you might not come back from this, and you want to walk into it anyway. He avoided the elevator. He didn't trust himself inside it. Not after what the last ascent to floor 48 had done to him. So he took the stairs. All 48 floors. He climbed them, like each step was a confession he couldn't say out loud. By the time he reached the top, his shirt clung to his chest, his lungs burned, and every rational thought was drowned by the echo of one line, "You gave me permission to chase." He didn't realize his legs were moving until the receptionist looked up from her desk. "Mr. Reed," she said. He froze. Every part of him expected Damien to be standing there waiting, arms folded, shadow cutting across the lobby, teeth in a quiet smile. But the office was empty. The receptionist cleared her throat like she knew something he didn't. "He isn't in." Those 3 words knocked the air out of him. "What?" Aiden asked. "He left an hour ago," she replied. "Early morning acquisition meeting. Leasing deal. Downtown." Aiden swallowed. He didn't know whether the disappointment he felt was relief or panic. "I'll wait," he said without thinking. The receptionist blinked. "You'll wait." Aiden nodded. She stared at him for several seconds longer than anyone should stare at an intern, and then without comment returned to her computer. Aiden approached the glass doors to Damien's office. Every instinct screamed not to enter. He did anyway. The room hit him like memory. The skyline, the cold floor, the desk that wasn't just stone anymore, the ghost of Damien's body heat in the air. He stood in the center of the office, staring at the exact place where Damien had placed his hands behind him. That was where the world changed. He didn't sit. He didn't pace. He waited. Minutes bled into 40. 40 bled into the clock rolling past 9. And then, the elevator chimed. Aiden didn't turn around. He heard footsteps. Not the brisk rhythm of assistants, not the tapping hustle of lower managers trying to look busier than they were. Slow, measured, confident. Each step had the arrogance of someone who had never been late in his life because time waited for him, not the other way around. The door behind him opened. Aiden didn't breathe. And then Damien's voice slid across the room like a gloved hand. "I didn't summon you." Aiden closed his eyes. Of course that would be his first line. Damien stepped into the office, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. "You climbed 48 floors, he said mildly. "That's desperation or devotion." He moved past Aiden, coat still on, gloves still in hand. He didn't look winded. He didn't look rushed. He looked like the morning had arrived to ask him permission before the sun came up. Damien placed a folder on the desk, then finally turned to face him. His gaze swept over Aiden slowly, like taking inventory. Hair still damp from sweat, shirt clinging to his chest, fingers trembling, eyes steady. Something flickered in Damien's stare. Not anger, satisfaction. "So," he murmured, "you came back." Aiden swallowed. "You didn't run," Damien said. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but every syllable carried weight. "You walked into the den, alone." Damien approached, shrugging his coat off one shoulder. He tossed it across a lounge chair, careless, confident. Aiden's pulse rose. Damien stopped an arm's length away. "What changed?" Aiden hesitated. Then, because he had no defenses left, "You said you don't chase people who want nothing from you." Damien's eyes lit like a match. "So you came to show me you want something." Aiden's throat tightened. "I came because I couldn't stop thinking about it." Damien's lips curved, slow and devastatingly satisfied. "About what?" Aiden forced himself to speak through the tremor. "You." Silence trembled between them, not the awkward kind, the seismic kind. Damien stepped forward, quiet but lethal. "And now," he murmured, "you finally understand the rule." Aiden held the CEO's gaze. Damien leaned in, not touching him, just erasing the air between them. "I don't pursue," he whispered. "I pull." Aiden's breath hitched. "And you," Damien added, voice dark as velvet, "you came willingly." He reached past Aiden again, fingers brushing the edge of the desk where the hunt had begun. Then he looked up. "You're here to tell me the real reason you avoided me," he said. "Not the excuse, not the fear." His next words slid into Aiden like teeth into soft skin. "Tell me the desire." Aiden didn't answer. Not yet. He stood there, trembling, not from fear anymore, but from the brutal realization he hadn't returned to tame the wolf. He had returned so the wolf could teach him what it meant to be chosen.